Elowen first saw Moonvale, she paused at the bend in the hill path, one hand on the strap of her satchel, and looked down at the scatter of houses stitched together by pale lanes. Lanterns hung everywhere, in doorways, along fences, strung from wire like garlands, and their glow gathered on the rooftops as if the moon had shaken loose a pocket of light and let it fall. Elowen's boots were dusty from the last stretch of road. The leather had softened in places where rain and sun had taken turns. Her key, an old brass thing on a braided cord, tapped lightly against her hip when she moved. She had carried it for years, a keepsake that belonged to no door she knew. It had traveled with her because it felt like a compass, not of places, but of timing. It told her when to stay, and now perhaps when to stop. She adjusted her cloak and continued down. The hillside smelled of pine, blown thin by cool air, with a sweetness she couldn't place. Honeysuckle, maybe, or something like it. The path narrowed between a stone wall and a thicket of blackberry canes, and when she drew level with the wall, she saw a porcelain tile set into the mortar, a crescent moon painted in blue, beneath it a line of neat script. "Welcome home, whoever you are." She touched the edge of the tile. The glaze felt smooth beneath her fingertip. Then she stepped through the gap in the wall and entered the village. Moonvale did not sleep the way other places slept. It breathed. The lanterns pulsed in small, steady ways, as if each one kept a rhythm separate from the others. Their light softened the corners of window frames and made the cobbles shine with dew. A cat perched on a windowsill with his tail tucked around his paws. His eyes reflected 2 coins of amber before he blinked and lowered them again. Somewhere, a fountain counted quietly. Elowen did not have a destination, only a habit. In every new town she found a place with bread. Where bread was warm, the conversation was warmer, and she could learn, without asking much, what sort of place she had wandered into. She turned down a lane where the lanterns ran closer together, and there she found a wooden sign, creaking lightly with a breeze. "The Silver Lantern," it read, and beneath, in smaller letters, "We serve warmth, water, and words." The door stood ajar. Heat drifted through the opening, tinged with cinnamon and the crisp scent of flour. Inside, a fire spoke in low, patient tongues. Elowen slipped through and let a door close behind her. The inn's room was long and narrow, with tables arranged in friendly lines and a counter polished to a soft sheen. Above the hearth hung glass bottles in pale colors, rose, honey, a faint blue, each holding something that glimmered. The bottles were quiet in the way of objects that had learned to be useful without announcing it. Only a handful of guests remained. An elderly couple shared a bowl of stew and a crusty loaf, seated near the fire. At a table by the window, a pair of men in work clothes nursed mugs of something dark. They spoke in low tones and with long pauses, as if their thoughts had to cross the whole day to reach their mouths. Behind the counter stood a woman with sleeves rolled to her elbows and flour on her forearms, cooling trays of small, round loaves. She looked up when Elowen approached. "Evening," the woman said. "You look like the road still has you by the ankles. Bread." "If there's a heel to spare," Elowen said. Her throat felt dry, but the dryness had a shape, like the last verse of a song, and water. The woman slid a plate across the counter, a heel of bread with a crust scoring like a field plowed in neat lines. Beside it, she set a small dish of butter with a hint of honey and a clay cup of water beaded with condensation. "First night?" she asked. "It feels that way," Elowen said. "Then welcome." The woman's mouth tilted, not quite a smile, and not quite not. "I'm Mara. My sister and I keep the place. If you stay, she'll find you a room after the bell." "What bell?" Elowen asked. Mara nodded toward the far wall. A narrow clock hung there, no hands, no face, only a brass pendulum tracing its patient arc. "You'll hear it. Moonvale keeps time differently." Elowen sliced the bread. The crumb was dense and warm. Steam rose in a ribbon, carrying spice and grain. She ate carefully, the way she did when she needed to listen. The inn's quiet arranged itself the way quiet does in a place that expects to hear something. Forks barely touched plates, the fire adjusted itself, and the outside wind tucked its shoulders. Mara moved to the hearth to tend the bottles. She lifted one, turned it a fraction toward the light, then returned it to the hook. Elowen watched the motion without meaning to. "What are they?" she asked. "Gloam jars," Mara said. "They catch the color of the last light and give it back when you need it. Some nights want more dusk than others." She took another bottle down, this one with a faint blue sheen. "This one is river dusk. Makes the room feel cooler when the air gets heavy." Elowen could have said, "That's not possible. That glass cannot hold a color of time any more than water holds an echo." But Moonvale's lanterns had already suggested other rules, and the key at her hip was warm for no reason she could name. "How do you catch gloam?" she asked instead. "With patience," Mara said, "and a net." She said it straight, as if there were no metaphor in it at all, and smiled when Elowen raised an eyebrow. The clock on the far wall chimed once, though Elowen could not see where a chime might hide inside it. The sound was small and round, like a drop of water meeting another drop. The men by the window stood as if called and finished their drinks. The elderly couple wrapped the remaining bread in a hank of cloth and tucked it away. Mara's gaze flicked toward the door. "Elowen," said a voice from the kitchen, warm and surprised. Elowen turned. A tall woman with a crown of dark curls came out carrying a bundle of folded linens. For a moment, Elowen thought she had misheard. No one here knew her name, but the woman's expression softened into apology. "Forgive me," the woman said quickly. "I thought you were someone else. The light, well." She shifted the linens onto the counter and extended a hand. "I'm Sera, Mara's sister. We have a room if you need one." "Thank you," Elowen said. She took Sera's hand and found it warm and work rough. "I do." Sera nodded, pleased by the simplicity. "Second floor, end of the hall. It faces the square, and the linden keeps it cool." She slid a key across the counter, iron shaped like a leaf. "The latch can be finicky. It likes to know who's coming in." Elowen set her brass key beside the iron leaf without thinking. The two keys touched and made a tiny sound, metal speaking briefly to metal. Mara glanced at them both, then at Elowen. "That one's old," Mara said softly. "Yours." "It is," Elowen said. She could not explain why the sisters, not with suspicion, but with interest, like a bird cocking its head. "You'll want to see the square before you sleep," she said. "The linden holds the night together, and the lanterns will be singing." "Lanterns don't sing," Elowen said before she could catch the reflex. The sisters smiled in the same slow way, and Elowen added, "Do they?" "Some nights," Sera said, "when there's something to remember." Elowen finished the heel and tucked her brass key back beneath her cloak. She took the iron leaf from the counter. It waited in her palm with a steadiness that felt like approval. The square lay a short walk from the inn. Elowen pushed open the door and stepped into the thin street. The night had deepened while she ate. The shadows were approachable, the way old furniture is approachable in a familiar room. She followed the seam of lanterns to where the street widened. Moonvale's square was not grand. It had the proportions of a room meant for gathering, with a linden tree at the center whose branches spread like green veils even in the dim. Benches circled the trunk. A stone basin hugged the northern edge. Water breathed there in a slow curve, and a silver coin lay on the bottom as if it had decided to be part of the place rather than a wish in transit. Around the square, homes and shops kept their shutters half-lidded, not quite closed. Lanterns, dozens of them, hung from the linden's lowest branches. Some were plain glass with simple caps. Others were painted with delicate swirls of clouds and birds. They swayed the length of a sigh whenever the air moved. Their light layered over itself until it seemed thick enough to touch. A handful of villagers stood at the benches, not speaking much, hands in pockets or folded before them. Elowen recognized the men from the inn, now with their hats off. A child pressed her cheek to the linden's trunk, as if listening. No one looked at Elowen. No one looked away. The clock chimed again, farther, fainter. The lanterns steadied. Elowen felt that even her breath found a slower cadence. Without being told, a figure stepped out from the dark edge near the basin. He was not tall, nor particularly old, but his posture had the set of someone who had been given a task he would not brush off. He wore a coat too thin for deep winter, but perfect for all other nights, and in his right hand he carried a lantern unlike the others, a narrow vessel with a lattice of metal so fine it seemed woven. He set the lantern at the base of the linden and lifted the cap. The light within did not spill upward. It thickened downward like honey warming in a spoon. Elowen saw, for a heartbeat, that the light had color, the exact pale green that lives on the underside of leaves where the veins run like quiet roads. The man spoke, not loudly, but with the tone one uses when addressing a room that already knows most of what will be said. "This is the last night before the fair of returning," he said. "Tomorrow we hang the memory strips and tie the bells. Tonight we listen." Elowen did not know what a fair of returning was. Her hand went to her satchel, to the notebook and pencil she kept there, but she did not take them out. Writing would put a thin veil between her and whatever this was, and she did not want veils. The man's lantern remained at a trunk. A breeze passed, and the linden's leaves replied with a small, even murmur. The other lanterns altered their glow, someone began to hum. Elowen could not tell who. The sound was modest, a tune that didn't require words because it had already known them and set them aside. Another voice joined, then a third. The humming did not grow louder so much as wider. It made a soft place in the air for itself and settled. Elowen watched the man who had set down the lantern. He closed his eyes. The lines at the corners of his mouth eased. He looked like someone remembering something useful and kind. A moth circled one of the painted lanterns, then chose a different, plainer one and stayed there, its wings veined like leaves under glass. Elowen found it irrationally reassuring. The lamp nearest her flickered once and then stabilized. She realized she was smiling, not out of happiness exactly, but out of fitting. The square felt like finding a coat in winter that had already learned the shape of your shoulders. When the humming faded, it did so by degrees. The child took her cheek from the linden and yawned. People lifted their heads in a quiet that was not silence exactly, but the neighbor of it. The man retrieved his lantern. He turned then, his gaze catching on Elowen, as one might catch on a word in a book one has not read yet, but recognizes. "You're new," he said, not as a question. "I am," Elowen said. He nodded. "I'm Rowan, lantern keeper for the square. The light is part of my work." "Elowen," she said. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then, as if he had reached a conclusion visible only to him, he smiled. "If you're planning to stay through the fair, bring ribbon," he said, "or paper. We write what returns." "What returns?" she asked. "Whatever the night kept for you," Rowan said. "Sometimes a name, sometimes a road." He adjusted the woven lantern's cap, and a leaf green light settled again. "You're at the Silver Lantern." "I am." "Good. Mara and Sera keep the lights honest." He stepped back and tilted his head toward the linden. "If you listen from the inn's window, you can still hear them a little." "The lanterns," Elowen said. He didn't answer. There was a kindness in his not answering, as if he were leaving a chair open at a table she might choose to approach on her own. Rowan walked toward one of the side streets and disappeared into it without hurry. The villagers began to drift away in twos and threes. The child tugged at her mother's sleeve. They crossed to the basin, each dropping a coin as if teaching the water to count. Elowen remained. The square no longer asked anything of her except time, and she had that. She stood with one palm against the linden's bark. The tree felt cool and slightly damp. Beneath her hand, something that might have been sap or night air moved with a patience that was almost a sound. When at last she returned to the Silver Lantern, the inn's hallway smelled faintly of lavender left to dry on a string. Her room was small and clean, with a bed tucked under a window that looked out on the square. The iron leaf key found its lock without fuss. The latch caught with a soft click, like a well-spoken yes. Elowen set her satchel on the chair and placed her brass key on the table by the window. In the lantern light, its surface shone dull and steady, unadorned except for a notch near the stem that had always looked to her like a question mark interrupted. She opened the window a finger's width space between waking and sleep, she wondered whether the man had really said, "We write what returns," or whether she had heard what she needed to. Her eyes fell on the brass key on the table. In the softened light, the notch near the stem looked almost like the curve of a leaf. She slept. The lanterns, if they sang, did so quietly, and the notes drifted through the half-open window like a promise stitched in small, neat letters. Outside, beneath the linden, the woven lantern kept its leaf-green glow. A moth rested on its lattice, and far away, too far for any clock, something counted the distance between one